Hi, everyone. Welcome to We Didn't Turn Out Okay. I'm here today with Beth Gaskill. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
The founder of Big City Readers. She's a learning and reading specialist. Before we dive in, Beth, can you introduce yourself in your own words?
Yes, I am a learning and behavior specialist turned multisensory reading specialist. I built Big City Readers, which originally was a tutoring company. But what I kind of saw was that a ton of kids were needing tutoring. And I was like, this seems like not a problem to solve, but maybe this is a problem we can prevent. And so I built an early childhood curriculum for parents and caregivers to do with their kids in the early years to kind of help prevent reading struggles later. And then what I learned, and we'll get into this, I know, but is that like a lot of kids aren't even learning how to read in school. And it's a huge issue. And, I hear parents say, yeah, but I struggled with reading and I turned out fine. But as we know, we didn't really turn out okay.
Right. Yes, yes. And I think it's going to be interesting to talk about how the not okayness can relate to reading and all that comes with struggles in that area. I actually want to believe I turned out okay when it comes to reading. Like I don't recall any like struggles in that area. Of course, there's many other ones like executive functioning and all of those things, but and focusing. But that being said, I have seen a little bit of struggle with my own kids. Of course, like when we're playing, there's times where I'll like incorporate, words and language and all those things. But I think I could have done it a little bit more and that the schools we chose maybe could have. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. If you feel like play-based education is at odds with early literacy.
No, it's actually not at all. And it's funny, if I talk to someone that doesn't really know what Big City Readers is, they're like, well, you're trying to teach kids how to read early. And that's not at all what we're doing. We're just trying to help kids before it becomes a problem. And you probably actually did do all the early literacy things, even though you think you didn't. Because I wasn't there in your parenting years in the early years, but I know what you believe in, and talking is one of the building blocks of early literacy. And so just like, doing the things like narrating what you're doing with your toddler or like playing I Spy or rhyming. So like reading rhyming books is one of like the biggest things that you could do, or even like silly song rhymes that you do are really important in those early years. And I think we often think educators, parents think that that's just like a silly thing to pass the time, but that's actually a crucial step in the learning to read process. It's called phonological awareness, and it's the biggest predictor of lifelong reading success and the most overlooked. And so those sound games that you play, like, like Willoughby Wallaby, Henny, an elephant sat on Jenny, that is tuning our ear into noticing sounds in words before we even start to look at them. So you probably did do these things, and playing and singing and narrating and counting are actually like the most crucial steps of early literacy.
Yeah. And I should have like given that disclaimer that I felt that I did. And I think what really happened, and I love your thoughts on this, is that, when it came time for kindergarten, first grade, that I think the confidence piece was lacking in my older daughter, that it was less about the skill, but that she was around children who actually had really been given these experiences and resources of like one-to-one early reading tutors and things like that. And that's something that I meant that I really didn't take on. I wanted to fill their days with more play. And there is a way to have tutors that are playful. We now have an awesome one that she's seen that she loves. But I think before it came time for kindergarten or first grade, I didn't think about that. And then, there would be times where the teachers or her would say, everyone's reading around me really quickly and I'm not. And, the hesitancy to share out loud. And so I would love to talk about that, like the overall approach before it comes time to like reading out loud and what you believe in, in school, and what you feel like when you said is not happening in school.
Yeah.
We can start there.
Oh my gosh, I'm totally going to get in trouble for this. But I I think that most schools are teaching reading the wrong way. And I also think like confidence is the most important thing in reading. And a lot of kids have false confidence. So I think it's better for kids to struggle earlier because they learn how to be problem solvers, how to tackle a big word. But they do at first, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, they start to get competitive and they hear other things. And one of my big fat no-nos is like kids should not know a reading level that they are. And reading levels, like if you are a parent of a child in school, I don't know if your school does this, but you might hear like they're reading at level G. We want them at level H. Is one of the types of assessments. It's one, super inaccurate. Two, does not show a real picture of what's happening. Like you want your school to tell you like, this is their developmental spelling level. This is where we see their writing is. This is what we're focusing on. You want really specific details. That level means nothing. So that's like that's the one thing that I think like where we got it wrong in schools is like this assessment was created was never meant for kids to know, and it was never meant for parents to know. It was supposed to be a data tool for schools, and now people become obsessed with it and they're comparing. They're like, what can your kid do? What can your kid do? And I'm just like, whenever I do a consultation with a parent or something, I'm like, that actually means like nothing to me. Like it means nothing about their reading level. It means nothing about your kid. In fact, it just tells me like what's going on in your classroom isn't that great.
Right. I was just going to say that one of the things, and I feel like we really, I feel privileged to be able to say this, that like when we were choosing a school, I asked specifically like how they approach that. Like, do the children know if they're at different reading levels and our school actually, they do not. I think as kids get older, they can connect the dots if they're being pulled out in a smaller group and things like that. But yes, I don't know what level she's at, and neither does she.
Amazing.
Thank goodness. And so if you are in a place where you're looking at schools, it is something to consider. If like the children are told, what reading level they're at, or if they need to be in smaller groups, they can connect those dots, but that they're not told, oh, you're going to like a special reading group, things like that.
Yeah.
And it can feel really daunting initially, like when I was told that she was, until then she came home and was like so excited that she was in this smaller group with some of her friends. So like you said, it's really not about the level they're at. It's about like kind of the resources that the school is able to provide, honestly.
Yeah.
And in a way that's not necessarily just skill-based. I think for her, a lot of it is social emotional and, like I said, confidence.
100%.
And how much of a role do you feel like that plays? I mean, I think even from remembering, like, it can feel like, I know that confidence plays such a part in reading, but I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I would say 90%, I want to say. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I always tell parents, like, I am going to work on their attitude first. I'm going to work on how they feel because as we know, kids that feel safe take risks. Learning to read is a risk. Learning to say a word that they've never said, to sound it out, to look silly out loud is a huge risk. And when kids don't feel safe to take risks, they're just going to shut down. So if we make them feel safe, like I often will start every lesson with, my goal here is for you to mess up. And if you get this all right, then I can't help you. And that means I can't do my job. And that's going to be really bad because I need to do my job. But I also want you to make a mistake because that is how your brain grows. If you do everything right, then like your brain's not going to grow. And oh my gosh, you're going to have to stay in kindergarten. And it's going to be such an ordeal. I'm going to have to talk to the school. And so like that kind of, helps kids relax a little bit when I say like, that is the only two things I want from you right now are to make a mistake and that I can teach you something. So I'm looking for it to get too hard. So I feel like that kind of mindset, like parents or teachers giving kids that mindset. Like the whole goal here is to not know what to do. That's what reading is, and then I can teach you the thing. So I would say confidence is the most important, so kids can feel safe and secure. You know, I'm a big fan of kids feeling safe physically and emotionally in the classroom. And when we start creating this like comparison dynamic or like this arbitrary thing, like a 6-year-old has no idea what it means to go from level B to D. Like, why don't you show them like, oh my gosh, at the beginning of the school year, this is how you wrote. You just knew the beginning sounds, and that was amazing because you were 6. Now you're 7, and you not only know short vowels, but you know these long vowels. You wrote this long vowel sound in the word cake, and that was tricky for you at the beginning of the year. And like letting them see actual progress that they've made rather than just this random like assessment that means nothing to them except for that they're not as good as someone else or better than someone else.
Yes, I completely agree. I mean, I love the idea of helping our kids know that the mistakes are where the learning happens and that the mistakes are things to embrace. I did have this one specialist who actually started the session with something where kids would always make mistakes, like they would get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And the approach in her mind was, to help them embrace the mistakes and to start out like with what you're saying. And it actually, for one of my daughters, I felt like wasn't ideal to start that way because she felt like discouraged right away. So what are your thoughts on that balance? Like, of course we want them to make mistakes, but we don't want them to feel like they're going into this with it already being too hard, even if it is. Yeah. I don't know. There's some kids where I feel like that can like be discouraging.
Oh yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you one of my biggest secrets. I can't believe I'm revealing this here, but this is one of my tricks. I always start a session with, I say like, we're going to play some games. I'm going to take some notes, and what I like ask them their favorite food and their least favorite food, and they'll usually say like broccoli or something, and I'm like, okay, what kind of broccoli? They're like hot, steamy broccoli, and I'm like, okay, so I want you to try your best. Some of these are going to be too easy, some are going to be just right, some are going to be too tricky. If it feels way, way, way too tricky, you can't even try, I want you to say hot, steamy broccoli, and that'll be our code. So I think like right away, giving them that code that they can get out of it gives a little bit of like forgiveness if it's not so stressful. And 2, I kind of gauge where they're at. So I say some of the games are going to be harder than others. So I have levels 1 to 197. 1 is the easiest, 197 is the hardest. What level do you want to start on? I already know what level I'm starting on. I know exactly what kind of assessment I'm going to give them. And so if they say 2, I know, like if it was your child, she might say like 2, I would know I'm not going to start on something that she's going to get wrong. I'm going to make it so easy that she's going to say, okay, give me level 100. So I wait, and then after every question, I say like, what level do you want? And I kind of gauge that way on how confident they're feeling. And I've never had a kid not say, okay, give me the hardest level within 10 minutes. But because they got to choose and they felt that. I mean, everything I was doing was the same thing I had planned the whole time, but they just got to feel like, okay, wait, I can do this.
Yeah, and that you kind of led them to having that bravery to challenge themselves, right? Yeah. Instead of like them feeling like they're already going into something that's just like way too challenging. You like prepared them with that confidence building to then get to a place where maybe it's too challenging, but they're like kind of like fueled up with all of that confidence. That I love that approach.
Yeah. And I think
there's a way to like, set them up for success, even if they're going to fail along the way, right? Instead of just like setting them up for like mistakes.
Right. And I think like a lot of kids, I remember I once had this student who was like so upset every time he had to clean up in the classroom. And I was like, he would like throw chairs, and I was like, you can use this tomorrow. And he was like, I can. And I think we forget, like kids, like we know what's going to happen, but in that like same moment of if something feels too hard and they shut down, we have to give them the out. Like it feels like they're like, okay, I'm climbing this mountain, and then what if I can't get down the mountain? But like giving them that code word to say if it feels like I'm at the top of the mountain and I'm so scared, is like, oh, I have a safety net. I can have this parachute I can get down the mountain with. So I think a code word is a helpful one too, and like showing them like they got themselves there.
Yeah, it's sort of like giving them a tool in resilience, almost like that instead of like shutting down, like you can use this word to like overcome or to like bounce back in a way. Even if you're like this using the word because it's too hard, it doesn't mean like it's too hard forever. It's like they can always
Yeah.
come back like the next day, or it's just like sort of that like safety net.
Yeah.
And I think a lot about this that like to me, reading feels like not the first, but one of like the biggest tests of resilience for kids. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I'm so enamored with working with infants and toddlers and building resilience in ways that like people don't necessarily always think about doing, because like babies are just so seemingly helpless. But if they're reaching for a toy or trying to crawl, that we often are like, okay, we have to rescue this baby.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on like the early wiring? Like to me, it feels like when a baby is reaching for a toy and you don't immediately give it to them, but you might sit down next to them and say, you're reaching for that toy, or move it a little bit closer. Even an infant that like won't be able to reach it, but like you're just waiting like a moment, responding. You're not
Mm-hmm.
ignoring.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's like helping to wire this resilience that like to me reading feels like one of the first times that like you see that kind of come to fruition, that you can't like rescue a child from reading, right? Like, you can't
Yeah.
like give them the words, like that doesn't do the same as like
Yeah.
it coming out of their own mouth.
Right. A lot of people, I think, a lot of parents give them the word, and we talk about this. Like, there is so much power in just waiting. Like, you're sitting there. It's kind of like, what you would do with their emotions. Like, you're not saying like don't have this emotion, but you're staying there with them. You're sitting next to them reading, and I always say like, make it lighthearted. Like, if they look at you, say like, oh my gosh, the letters got on my face, get them off, and just like remind them like, you're there with them, but they're doing it on their own. So I always say like, count to 10 in your head before giving them the word. And then before you give them the word, give them the strategy. That book might be too hard. If they're waiting for 10 seconds looking at the word and they can't do it, then that's a big sign that you need to practice some decoding skills. Like, you don't have to practice reading skills in a book. In fact, like, I rarely bring a book to any tutoring session that I would do. Like, you can practice decoding in just like games at dinner with your kids with a dry erase board, and that's going to help them a lot.
Yeah, I love that. I talk about like kind of sitting on your symbolic hands,
Mm-hmm.
which, believe it or not, like becomes harder for me, honestly, as my kids have gotten older. Like I felt like it was almost like easier when they were younger. Like, not because like, like when I will say something like, oh, did the words get on my face? Which I love. I actually have not said that one. That was a great one. But something like, what are your, like, what do you think this word starts with? If they're struggling, you know, my kids have like caught on, right? They know what I'm doing at 5 and 7, and they're almost like, Mom, stop, just give it, just tell me.
Yeah.
Do you find that in like kids that you're especially like maybe closer with, or your own, or,
Oh,
where they're more
yeah.
comfortable to be like, stop, just tell me what it is?
Oh, yeah. It is and it's so much easier to tell them too. Like, because how many times I often talk about when kids are learning to write, the best thing that you can say when they say, how do I spell? Is to say, let's stretch that word out together. And then when they say, is this right? You can say, I hear those sounds too. And so many people say, well, my kid says, just tell me. I don't want to know if you heard the sounds. And it takes a lot of rewiring, right? We've conditioned them to ask us for anything that they need. So it is tricky, and they definitely will get frustrated. But just like the practice of it, of saying like, in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to put a timer on. I'm not going to tell you any of the way to spell any of these words. But if you do have a kid that's like, just tell me, I think you got to do a little bit of a shift. And I often will tell parents to like write them a letter and say like, I made 5 mistakes. Can you find my mistakes here? Because they might be like, I just want you to tell me, is this right? So you're going to teach them how to self-correct by having them correct you.
That's so helpful. Yeah, like I do have, And I think it's also the education piece. Like, when we have teachers or educators that are also approaching it this way, like I've shared this before, but when we were looking at schools, like one child I saw was like tracing a number and kept erasing and tracing, and they got it right. And then raised her hand and was like, I can't do this. And the teacher came over and did like a bigger dotted line for her to trace. Didn't say anything, just did that. And and I wasn't judging. It could have just been like a blip or a snippet, but I was thinking about how much, something like that is amiss, in this like wiring. And not even like, convincing this child that she did it right, but sort of like, you don't think you did that right? Like, can we spot the number 2 in this room? And not even calling her out, maybe like kneeling down next to her, something like that. Just something that helps children know to expect that there's going to be like some problem solving when it comes to this. Isn't just a one person team. Like, it can't just be us.
Yeah.
And so that's just such a piece that I feel like, when you're visiting schools or inquiring about schools, you might not think about like, how do you approach when kids ask for help? And to me feels like so foundational in education and life.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. I actually, that made me think of when touring schools, I think one of the biggest green flags you can see is misspelling hung up. Because like that shows you that they are teaching like what's developmentally appropriate. If a kindergartner is spelling everything correctly, I'm like, oh, you're like missing the point. They're, like, of course, there's some times that you're just gonna be like, fine, they want to write their grandma's name perfectly. Like, I'm gonna let them do it. Of course, it's not all or nothing. But I definitely, I will tell kids at the beginning of a session, or if I'm doing a professional development with a school, I say the best thing you can do every single day, every single lesson is remind them, like, I'm not going to tell you this answer because that's not what the goal here is. I'm a big fan of like, like if kids are like, I can read faster than that kid, they like hear me reading a kid reading out loud to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Well, actually, we're trying to read as slow as possible. So he's reading slower than me. And like,
I love that.
And then they're just like, they're so competitive. And then like, okay, well, I can read slow. It's like, okay, great, go practice it.
Yes. Oh my God. The competitiveness is like, and it's why, like, another testament to why like hanging things up that are imperfect is so important, for kids to be proud of like that, like you said, that progress and things like that. We've talked a little bit offline about like our beliefs in the education system, and we've alluded to it a little bit here. And to me, like the biggest miss is, I mean, I could like talk for centuries about this, and I have like more interviews with other people relating to the approach to education. But as we talked about, I believe so much in play in the early years, and then I feel like, it just has to switch. And until recently, when I've like found out about other things, and again, this is for another time, other approaches, I've just felt like, okay, but that's just what happens. Like, we have a traditional antiquated education system in America, and like it just becomes classroom oriented. But what you and I are both talking about is kind of like these like real world experiences, rather than, like you said, you don't even bring a book.
Right.
Like, you're doing these like games and things like that. And to me, it feels like that's just such a big part of what's missing to, in the classroom, that like kids are learning in like sort of a vacuum setting, and not like I think they could learn math by like putting together something, a piece of furniture.
Absolutely.
And with reading, like, again, I think it could be through play and things like that. But where do you feel like, do you believe in starting early on? Like I told you, when Tess was around her friends and they had all had these like tutors preemptive of kindergarten, like what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I actually tutored, I taught a 2-year-old to read once because his mom was like, I'm going to get a tutor, whether it's you or someone else. And she was like a friend of mine, but she's like, so if you want it done right, you have to do it, or else I'm going to get someone else. And I was like, oh, this is so against what I believe in, but okay. And like he was ready. He was almost 3, and he was ready to learn how to read.
He was interested. And his mom wanted him to. And I was like, I am never going to be a flashcard person. I actually, here in New York, I met with a family, and they were like,
my gosh, my son's starting kindergarten. He can't read. And everybody said, just start these sight word flashcards. And I was like, no, never do that. Burn those. And she was like, what? Everyone said they can do it. And all of their kids are reading. And I was like, they're not really reading. They're fake reading. If kids are memorizing sight word lists, they're fake reading. We see it in third grade that they start failing. Like our nation's report card shows that 60% of kids are not reading proficiently at third grade and beyond. And it's because we switched this in schools to memorizing sight words because it's like a quick fix. It looks like kids are reading, but it's fake reading. They have just memorized the shape of a word. And as we know, little kids can memorize things. They memorize shapes. Like if they say like, oh, we're on Melrose Avenue, like that's because they've like seen it before. They're not actually sounding the words out. So I would say, no, I'm morally against most of formal tutoring before kindergarten, unless it's like somebody that's play-based and you're doing like letter games and sound stuff like rhyming and syllables. But I always am like, parents, you actually have what it takes, and it takes like 3 minutes a day.
I need you to elaborate on the 3 minutes per day, but just like circling back to what you were just saying, like, yes, I believe that too. I mean, the book, like Einstein never used flashcards, like all those things, like, but the approach changed maybe under the premise that instead of like sounding out words, which maybe they felt was more like rote, oh, why don't we like point out words in the world in the hopes that then it'll like absorb, like maybe the approach had the right intention.
Yeah.
But when did that shift? And do you believe that's why? Like in my heart of hearts, I'm like, maybe the intention was like, instead of sitting and drilling them, we should point out like letters and words and they memorize, and then it becomes like applicable. Obviously we now know that's like this third grade slump is like why that doesn't work. Can you tell us all your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah. I was a teacher that went to school, and then I was working as a reading specialist, and I was the person that was telling kids to memorize sight words. That was what I was taught. And I was like, yeah, this makes sense. I could make a killing if I still was doing sight words and having kids do that. It's so, because you can get quick results, right? I'm doing quotes for those that are listening. You can get quick results, but it's like cotton candy when you're hungry. It is not going to last. You are going, like, it's not going to fill you up. So it looks like kids are reading. We're just pushing them off to the next grade. There was a shift. So we used to teach this way, and then I think it was, I don't know the exact years, but America is so not regulated in education. So it's different in every state. It's different in every classroom. It's different. Like, you could have two kids in kindergarten across the hall from each other and have different curriculum happening. It's a hot button issue for me, obviously. But in the 90s, there was, I believe it was the 90s, a shift. Now some states have actually changed back. There's new laws against this memorizing and this, it's called 3Qing. It's where you tell kids to look at the picture, like for extra clues, to look at the first letter and to take a guess, like what would make sense there. So if you're reading like, the bear is brown, and they're like, the bear is born. And you're like, what would make sense there? And then they're like, oh, brown. And then that's like, great, you read, but they weren't really reading. It's that cotton candy again. And so it's like, oh, great, they passed the test, they figured it out. First grade, second grade, then we're in third grade, and they do not know how to decode a word. They're just guessing at a word. I saw a kid try to read the word hot dog as hotel because it's about the same amount of letters, H-O. That's like what they've been taught. So it's a big shift that is happening. I think New York is one of the states that has passed the law to ban this 3Qing with memorizing words and guessing at pictures. So like that means that schools can't use that strategy anymore because it's not a strategy. But I agree with you that I think in my heart of hearts, I want to believe that it did make sense to somebody that they were like, yeah, this seems easier. Kids are having more fun learning to read because we're not making them sound it out. But it's actually like a big social justice issue because I saw this firsthand. I had a student, so there's a lot of these books that have this repetitive text. So it's like, I like the swing, and like the picture is a swing. I like the dog, and the picture is a dog. So you memorize the pattern, and then one picture is changing. So you're looking at the first letter and then the picture. Most early reader books follow this pattern. And so I had a student in kindergarten, and it was like, I like the swing, I like the dog, I like the bicycle. And I was like doing the strategy that I was taught, right? I was like, what is that a picture of? And she had never seen a bicycle before. And that is like, so it works to just say memorize words, but like certain kids have seen more words or have seen more objects. And so then, there's these researchers that are, hundreds of years old. This is not new information, but they are like, no, there's a way to teach everyone how to read, whether or not they've seen the word or not.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that goes into so much about like social justice and things like that, but it also goes into, building like a toolbox for our kids. Like similarly, with my daughter, we were reading a book like that, and I think it was like a clock, and she was only looking at the pictures and was like, this is time, let's say, or a watch. There's times where they can't like decipher the picture.
Right.
And it's just like setting them up for failure, right? And then they get so frustrated. They're like, what do you mean this is a clock or this is a watch? Or like for that, it could be like, I ride the bike instead of bicycle.
Right.
What do you mean it's a bee and there's a bike? Like it just doesn't give them a toolbox.
Right.
It gives them like context clues, but it needs to be both. And so I feel like it's really like setting, it's a really big like confidence piece. Of course, I'm not saying take all frustration out of reading, but there's a lot of frustration involved, especially you could argue in the English language where it's like so confusing, even with these tools.
Right.
Yeah. And so there's a way, like I'm sure you do, to make these tools fun.
Yeah.
Instead of the memorizing on index cards.
Yeah.
What can you recommend to parents who are like struggling to read or like, not keeping up, or like how I'm describing, I don't want to like say too much about where we're at, but we struggle sometimes.
Yeah. I would say practice decodable sentences. So either your dry erase board, like a tiny dry erase board, is going to be your best friend, and you're just going to write decodable sentences. Decodable means that they follow phonetic rules. So let's say you have a 6-year-old and they know all of their letters and sounds, which I guess I'll back up one step and say, check that they know all of their letters and sounds. There's a lot of people adults that are not even saying that the letter sounds the right way when they're teaching their kid the ABCs. They're saying like, or no, sorry, that's the right sound for They're saying like,
I'm like, wait a minute.
No, sorry. I'm obviously programmed to say it the right way. Or they're like, there's these alphabet books that are like, I is for ice cream. But when kids are learning to decode, they're going to see short vowel sounds like or ah. So like if we say like a is for acorn, that's not a word that they're going to decode when they're first starting. So your best friend is going to be CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant. So at the very early stages of learning to read, if they know about, I would say 7 letters, you can start teaching them to blend CVC words. And you're just going to teach them to decode those words like Sam. And you can do this with like short sentences like the cat ran fast. You just write that on a dry erase board, have them read it to you, and then erase it. These are the kind of things. So in simplest form, like just think of consonant, vowel, consonant words and write them in a short sentence. It doesn't have to make a lot of sense. And have them practice reading those sentences. And then kids love erasing. So like let them erase it immediately after they read it. I would say that is like what a parent can do. What was the question you asked?
Yeah, no, things that they could do. And you're reminding me how much more fun that seems. Like I have a close friend, I love them. And I actually was like, oh, I should have done that. Who like, every morning they probably still do it. They would have like lined paper set out on the breakfast table, and they would have their son had to write 3 sentences every morning. And when I thought about how daunting that would be to get my daughter to do it, I was conflicted. I was like, but he probably like it's just become part of his routine.
Yeah.
But the dry erase feels like a more fun element of that.
Yeah.
But this whole like he had to sit and write 3 sentences. I guess like my hesitancy with doing something like that is just how much like I don't want to make it feel, you know, like we both believe in this, like where they're like a bad kid if they don't
Yeah.
want to do that, or like
Yeah.
where like reading is and writing should be forced and it's not like this fun element. It's like you have to sit and do this when like sometimes in the morning, like my kids are about to go into school and be sitting for a lot of the day. Like I don't want them to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I
I would
yeah,
say,
what do you think about?
well, I always say you have to be on their team. Like they have to know above all you are on their team. So if they're pushing back on reading and writing practice, you have to take a break. Like take 2 weeks off and then we're going to take a new approach. But I once said this to a parent and she was like, oh, I'm so glad you said that because she was throwing a fit about this homework packet. And so I said, come out. It was over the summer. She said, come on, we're going to the backyard. And she said, we had a bonfire and I ripped it up and threw it in it. And I was like, yes, do that.
I want to do that.
Do it. You can.
Because the homework, we have to talk about that too. It just like kills me.
Oh, you can opt out of
Kills me.
homework legally as the parent. Did you know
I mean,
that?
and we have the most lovely school ever, the most supportive. Like I feel very lucky. Like I'm knocking on wood that I
Yeah.
feel so grateful. But the homework, I think what feels so tough, similarly with this, like if I were to imagine asking her to write sentences, is that like she does not want me to be the person to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's because we've like set the stage where like I haven't been that person, or kids just release the most with
Yes.
their safe parent. Like I'm sure she doesn't want her teachers to be that person either, but she's not going to be like no and rip it up and crumble it the way she
Yeah.
would with me.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's times where I'm like, it's the end of the day. Like I just got home from work. She's had a long day. Like the last thing I want to do is be like making her do something that like isn't filling her up with feeling great.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to see me and make mistakes. She wants to see me and make me proud. Even if I'm like, I'm so proud of you for trying, I could say till I'm blue in the face.
Yeah.
So yeah, a homework bonfire sounds great.
I would say, okay, if you like, I would say give it a reset if she's like pushing back all the time on it. But you could do like use me. Say like, oh my gosh, my friend Miss Beth wants us to try this thing. Will you try it with me? And she wants us to report back to her on how writing these sentences go. So I'm going to give you a sentence to write, and then you're going to give me a sentence to write. And then like just start with like, okay, I wrote a sentence, you wrote a sentence, and like be like probably how you already are, but be like, I guess that was the only assignment. I guess I'm going to tell her we're done. And then I would bet that she's like, well, ask her if she has any other sentences she wants us to write.
Yes.
Like
yeah,
make me the bad guy.
Yeah, I love that. I also was thinking about like just how much there's an opportunity to empower them when it comes to like them not competing with themselves, but like I just remember, I don't know if it was called like Star or something like that. We had these little reading books.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably dating myself. And while like I don't remember like seeing other people's, I think we talked about it like where we are on the star sheet, but it was more about like how far I was getting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like you can't always do that, right? Like you're around other kids in a classroom, or you might hear them reading out loud, and then become like there's always going to be that internal comparison. We're
Right.
human beings. But do you feel like there's a way to help kids just focus on their own like progression despite being in a classroom around other kids? I mean, I'm very much on this mindset because I've been learning a lot about this new AI school that it's for another podcast,
Oh, I
but where the
just saw
kids are
that.
really, yeah. I mean, we visited different podcasts. I'm having
Gosh.
the founder on for the
wait.
Alpha School, but like it's very much like kids are in their own learning progression. They might talk to others about it and set goals amongst each other,
Mm-hmm.
but like their progression in that like 2.5 hour learning is very much like themselves.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that's like realistic, or there's a miss there?
No, that's totally realistic. So I would say, I mean, and this might fall on the parents because I don't know, it's like I said, like schools are so different, but if you wanted to help your child get really realistic about their own progress. And so I would say, one, like if you're at a school that they give you the reading level, rip it up. Say like, this doesn't really matter to me. I'm proud of you if you're happy. But if you have a child, like, also, I don't want to like bash if people are like, my kid loves homework. Like, that's great. This is not the advice for you.
Oh yeah.
So if you want to help them with their own individual progress, I would say like write down, give them like 10 words to write. And let's say you have a 7-year-old, I would look at a couple of spelling rules like that would be that a 7-year-old should know. And that would be short vowel sounds. They should know all their short vowel sounds. They should know the CK rule, like when a one-syllable word with a short vowel ends in a k sound, it has to be CK. But if it's not one syllable, it's going to be just a K, like sock or soak. So sock has the CK, short O. Soak is long O, just has the K. That's a rule they should know. They should know long E, magic E, like in cake. So anyway, I would give them like a little assessment. They should know digraphs like SH, TH, WH. So I'd give them like a little assessment, have them write these 10 words. And then I would look at it with them and I would say, I'm going to teach you 3 rules. There are 3 rules that you don't know. I can see looking at these words. And by next month, like maybe you have a calendar, you say, I bet you're going to know these 3 rules. So I would then like explicitly teach, like that is what we're missing in literacy instruction is explicit instruction. And parents have the ability to do that. It's very simple and short. This is where the 3 minutes comes in. You're just going to explicitly say, like say she writes wish, W-I-C-H. You say like, oh my gosh, I mix up those 2 digraphs all the time. A digraph is 2 sounds, 2 letters that make a new sound. So CH says ch, 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 and you're going to give them like a visual. SH says sh, sh, sh. You're going to do a word sort with them, CH words, SH words. And then you're going to give her those sentences. So maybe it's like you put a timer on for 5 minutes, say, how many sentences can I give you with SH words in it? And you write them. And then in a week, say, look, you learned SH. I know it seems like that is easier said than done, but it's like, it just is like writing is reading. So like if they can write it, they should be able to read it. If they can read it, they should be able to write it. So like if you have a child pushing back on reading practice, get rid of the book and just like do 3 sentences a day and it's going to help.
Yeah, I mean, and this is why like you're such a resource on like your Instagram and things like that. Like I'm sure like even myself included, listening to that feels like, okay, but then like if I were to ever approach my kid, they'll be like, no, I'm not doing it. 'Cause, you know, we need all like these like tangible tips on what to do and where to start when it comes to things like that. But I think you're right. We so often, like we're talking about, don't want to rescue, but teaching isn't rescuing.
Yeah.
You know, like if it's like they're trying to sound out white and they're like, you know, don't know that WH is just, well, like, you know, that you could then, you know, create, you know, just be like, you know, when WH is together, I mean, I'm probably botching this and it's probably the only word where when it's together, it makes that sound, but you know what I mean? You could create like, you know, not a lesson, but teach something there. That's not rescuing. That's like saying, like you said, let's like sort them and do it. And so that's why like you've been such a resource for people because you share things on like what people could do in that way that we might not think about.
Well, and I think there's really power in a parent saying to the child, I actually don't know why it's like this, or I'm learning these rules with you. Like I didn't learn to read this way either. I say that to kids. I was working with a 7th grader recently and I was like, he said magic. He was reading the word magic and he said magic. And I was like, oh, do you know the G rule? And he was like, no. And I was like, okay, G usually says G unless it's followed by an I, E, or Y. Then it says J. And he's like, why didn't anyone tell me that before? And I was like, it's actually not your fault. A lot of teachers don't even know that. And I'm sure your parents don't even know that. So like you're learning something that a lot of people don't know how to do. That's why reading feels hard because you haven't been told the tricks to it. It just feels hard to people that have an awareness, to kids that like have this like these sensors that go off like this doesn't make sense. So you're lucky that you noticed it's tricky. And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I have a child like that. Her sensors go off when it doesn't make sense. Like there's sometimes where I'm like, I know there's like a lot of things in our language that might not make sense. And I realize sometimes that can feel discouraging for her because then it's like, okay, I give up. This is just like too hard. So like you have to like kind of balance that.
Yeah.
I'd love to like also switch gears here and hear from you since, this is called We Didn't Turn Out Okay, if you're
Yeah.
comfortable, and share if there's anything that you feel like brought you to what you do
Mm-hmm.
in your own,
Oh yeah.
upbringing.
I can't believe I didn't start with
And if
that.
it relates to any areas that you felt like, I didn't, I could work on some stuff there.
So I actually built Big City Readers because I was a second grader who was labeled as a slow reader. And though I'm a highly sensitive kid turned highly sensitive grown up, deeply feeling, all the rebrands of it, but I have highly sensitive processing. And I've gotten into a debate with people about this because that's not a thing. I'm like, no, it is really a thing. And
It is a thing.
it is a thing. I'm like, it's not like I'm complimenting myself. It is a hard way to live. But
Oh yeah. Oh no. I don't think it's yeah.
yeah, no. But I felt so much shame in my body. I remember being 7 years old and I felt the blood rush out of my body when I went to work with this reading specialist in this closet in this little school. And I went home that day. I held it together and I went home and I said to my parents, I want to go to a different school because I felt shame. I felt different. I felt everyone was knew that I wasn't as good as everyone else. And I'm a happy person, but I started to feel scared about going to school. I cried almost every morning. I had anxiety about going to school for years because of that. I poor Mrs. Green, obviously didn't know any better, but it hit me the wrong way. And I declared as a second grader that I was going to grow up and I was going to build a place that everyone wanted to come to learn how to read. And that kind of fueled my desire to help parents. They say be who you needed when you were younger. And I wish that I had someone that when I was younger that was telling the teachers at the school, this is how you should approach pulling a kid out for reading. Or this is the behavioral thing that you're seeing, or, so a lot of things I do focus a lot on behavior as well. And I work with a lot of schools on learning and behavior stuff because a lot of kids are misunderstood, you only see, that they just reacted to that kid, but you didn't see all of the moments they were feeling overwhelmed sitting on the rug next to 28 of their friends and you're just asking them to be silent for that many hours and go to the bathroom when you say so. And of course then you just they get in trouble because they snap. But anyway, so that my own personal experience of being sensitively wired and feeling insecure about reading fueled that. And I also I have a big family. I'm the youngest of 4 biological, and then my parents adopted 6 kids with special needs.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and my
Unbelievable.
it's very fun, very crazy, very fun. But my little brother is autistic, and he was like, "You taught me how to read when nobody else could." And I feel like I'm gonna cry. I was saying that, but I didn't even remember that. I was 23 when he said that to me one day, and I was like, I did? And he was like, yeah, we were sitting on the navy blue carpet in the living room. And I always knew you were going to teach everyone how to read because you taught me. And I was like, oh my gosh. And so he is part of it. And then also my parents really are a support system for a lot of people. And I also wanted to build a community that supported not just parents of kids with different needs, but all parents, because everybody needs someone who has their back,
Yeah, wow, that's so unbelievable to hear. I mean, all I keep hearing as you're talking is this new belief that I have that everything in our life has happened for us and not to us.
Mm.
How much that little girl in the closet that was labeled a slow reader is meant to bring you to help all these other people, including your own brother. It's really just feels meant to be in that way. And then also what your parents built around you with the support that they were giving to kids who really needed that.
Yeah.
It feels like it all came to fruition. Do you feel like there was anything around having so many siblings that made you feel either more or less supported with like this highly sensitive being that you were?
Oh, yeah. I did not. I mean, I love my parents and I love my family, but I did not feel supported because this I know my mom won't listen to this podcast, so it won't hurt her feelings, but my
Why not?
well, because she doesn't know how. She doesn't even listen to my podcast. I'm like,
Right.
Mom, she recently said to my other sister, she's like, what does Beth do? I'm like, Mom, but that's where I didn't turn out okay. That my mom had so many kids that I didn't really feel supported because a lot of their focus was on, the kids with more needs. And so like we were my biological sisters and I talk about this now as adults, like we had less needs, quote unquote, less needs, but like as an adult who works in this field, I'm like, every child has needs. And so I internalized a lot, like that I wasn't, like my needs weren't big enough ever. And like, I'm just here to help, which is something I've been working through in all of my adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you know at the time, or do you remember feeling like, they're just one person and there's so many kids and like
No, I was
like
not.
besides that it created these narratives for you which were like my needs aren't as important, did you have an understanding early on like there's just too many kids, like my parents are spread too thin?
I did have that understanding. I did not have any anger at my parents as a child at all. Or at my siblings. They also did foster care. So we had like 100 foster babies throughout my childhood that were like
Oh
6
my
months
God.
I know. And I remember I was 6 years old and my parents, we also on Thanksgiving would feed this homeless shelter. So my parents would make like 12 turkeys. And so they were at the neighbor's house using the oven because they were out of town. So like we had all the turkeys in the oven and it was like 7 a.m. on Thanksgiving. And there were these 2 babies, newborn babies, and I'm 6. And they're in the pack and plays in the living room because there's so many kids in so many places. But one was on a heart rate monitor and one was on an oxygen tank. And I remember feeling nervous that what if like smoke alarm goes off and what if there's a fire while my parents are just next door, like literally right next door, taking out the turkeys at the neighbor's house. And I'm like, I'm responsible for these babies. I'm going to use the oxygen tank to break the window and I'm going to grab the babies and I'm going to get out the window. I mean, if that doesn't tell you like a deeply feeling kid, like that I'm like looking for all of the problems that could happen and like, how am I going to save everyone here? But that was like me. So I took it very seriously that my job was to help people as a little kid. Like I remember we once went to pick up this baby from a house fire and this grandma was so sad that she had to give her baby to foster care. And she was like, the baby's wrapped in a green towel and she was crying and my mom was like hugging her and she was like, we're gonna take care of her. And I said, what's your name to the grandma? And she said, Elizabeth. And I said, well, she's going to feel connected to you because my name is Elizabeth too. So she's going to feel like she's still with you while you're cleaning up the fire and taking care of the other kids. And like, I remember these like moments that like, I was like, that was like what I always felt like that was, of course, like you and I, and probably most adults can see that now, like that, like that's a lot of responsibility that a kid would feel.
Yeah.
My parents didn't ask me to do that. It's just like, kind of like my temperament mixed with the lifestyle that we had that made me that way.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there. I was just going to say that you were around people who dedicated their life to helping. And so, of course, that was like setting a tone for you that you were like, this is what we do. Mm-hmm. And you admire your parents. And like, yeah, that was, and you were deeply feeling all of those things. But there's also an element of looking back and knowing, when things might have felt too big for you, right? Like that sense of responsibility then.
Yeah.
And then also the fact that, like you said, you didn't blame your parents. You might still not, they were like out there helping save all of these babies. But I've talked about like how we have these like traumas, bigger or small. And it could be something like, when I've talked to friends about this and they're like, I'm traumatizing my kid. I was like, look, you could say that, your child can have ice cream for dinner and they can internalize that as like a trauma. Like, and I'm not trying to like make us all feel scared. They could be like, I'm not good enough that I'm not having ice. Like, you know, it could be a new sibling and that's its own trauma. Like, you know, life has traumas. You could be the most perfect parent, but it's just more of like this element of, you know, that kids internalize and create narratives, and like our job, you know, even relating to like reading, is to help them create healthy narratives.
Yeah.
Right. And so even if it's like, you know, your parents seeing you say something like that and saying to you like, that was so kind, but you also know that like, we're going to make sure that this baby is taken care of as the grown, you know, and I'm not saying they did anything wrong, but like, that's just sometimes why I like to share things that like, there could be misses. There's going to be a million that we miss, but like when we can catch it, to kind of help create these like narratives that are healthier.
Yeah, I say that to my sister all the time. She'll be like, I feel like I'm like, did I just yell at my kids and like now they're going to cry when they're at school? And I was like, no, because you are their parent and our parents aren't their parent. Like, so I think so many times like parents are like panicking, but it's because like it's our own inner child that is like,
totally,
I don't like how you just reacted, but like our kids are fine. Like they have so many more resources than we did.
Yes. Yeah, there was this time, I mean, I struggle with that all the time. Recently, there was this time where, you know, my daughter was picked up by the bus and there was like this misunderstanding before the bus where like she was trading like a Labubu with a friend, and the friend's mom texted me like, we traded a real Labubu, can you give it back, whatever. And Tessa's like, it wasn't a real Labubu, and I ended up giving that Labubu to someone who didn't have one. So here she was feeling like she did something wrong, that she didn't even have it. She gave it to someone who didn't have it. And anyway, after she left, I called the mom. I was like, what happened? She's like, oh my God, my husband thought it was real and it wasn't. I'm so sorry. And I could have just like sat with that. But instead, I was like, I have to call the bus counselor and tell Tess. I can't imagine her spending the day thinking she did something wrong. And I shouldn't have called. I mean, it was ridiculous. I know that Tess, so I called. She's on this little like car with like 5 kids. And I said to the bus counselor, I'm like, I know this is crazy. Like, can I just talk to Tess for a really quick second? I said, Tess, it was a misunderstanding. Like, I love you. And she's like, okay, Mom, bye. And it was her way of being like, Mom, you're doing this for you. Like, it sort of was her being like, you're calling for you, Mommy. Because you can't handle that. Like, maybe I would have like, whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like, yeah.
That reminds me, my niece was there was like this magician at this block party, and he like called up, he was like, I need a volunteer, and she goes up and she's like 7 and she's like doing all these things, and he's like, and now I'm gonna lift you up. She was like, actually, I don't want to do this. And he was like, okay. And she goes back down, and my sister and I were like, oh my God. My sister goes, are you crying? And I was like, yeah. I was like, you are so brave. You're so good at advocating for yourself. She's like, I know. And I'm like, we're like we both were like, can you imagine like being able to be like, I don't want this. Like, and she just like, it's not a big deal. I just said I didn't want to do it. Like, why are you guys freaking out over nothing? I just said I didn't want to do something.
Right. Yeah, there's so many things that like, and it's why I love talking like this in the podcast, because there's just so much of our own stuff that like we think we're coming from the right place, but when we really like peel back, it's like, yeah, it's not a bad place, but it's really like an us place.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Thank you for sharing so openly about all this, like, because I know we could talk forever. I want to just like ask you a few like kind of rapid things before we have to wrap up.
Yes, great.
You're like a treasure trove of advice, but is there one piece of parenting advice that you feel you give most often?
I think it's that you know your child the best. Like, whenever, you know, if it's like you're looking for a school, or you feel like you're asking for too much of your child's teacher, or like, am I being ridiculous at the pediatrician? Like, you are the expert of your child. And I know like that probably is not new information to most people, but like, you do know your child. Like, don't let any teacher or doctor or therapist, like, think of them as a tool in your toolkit or a resource, but you are the expert of your child.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. These are all such great tips. I'm like just thinking about how I want to implement some of them, but that it might feel a little bit impossible for me and the dynamic with my child. So, what can you recommend before we sign off for someone like me who just feels like, yeah, I can't be the one?
Yeah, well, okay, you can go to bigcityreaders.com, and we actually have a course for kindergarten, first, second, and third graders, and it has 25 on-demand lessons. So you can either sit next to your child and do it, but you can make me the bad guy and be like, my friend Miss Beth has this lesson. She wants to know what you think of it, and just put it on, and I will teach your child to read.
Oh my God. That's amazing. And look how lovely you are. My child will not think you're the bad guy and will probably love it. So
Yay, I hope so.
thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening today to Beth on We Didn't Turn Out Okay.